A little girl offered her only coin to a humiliated stranger at a luxury restaurant, without knowing he was a lonely millionaire. From this innocent gesture, secrets came to light, lives intertwined, and a cold heart found redemption in unexpected love. Prepare yourself, because this story will touch your soul. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. The crackling of wood in the fire, the delicate tinkling of crystals, the murmur of polite conversations that blended like a symphony of superficialities. At the Golden Chateau restaurant, the city's elite gathered not just to eat, but to exist in each other's eyes. The burgundy-toned walls absorbed secrets and vanities, while crystal chandeliers poured golden light over faces that smiled only with their lips, never with their eyes. In that world of carefully constructed appearances, no one noticed the middle-aged man occupying the corner table. It was as if he existed on a different frequency, present, but invisible to eyes that only saw status. Richard Morrison had discreetly aligned gray hair, a well-cut dark suit, but without the ostentation of brands that screamed for attention. There was in his eyes a quietude that contrasted with the superficial agitation around him. Those eyes had already seen the rise of empires and the fall of men who thought themselves gods. While methodically cutting the steak he barely touched, Richard observed the restaurant's rhythm with the precision of someone who had studied human behavior for decades. At the next table, a young couple exchanged bored looks between photos for social media. Behind them, 3 executives laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. And through the entrance door, a woman with a small girl was discreetly led to a distant table, out of sight of the regular customers. There was something about that child that immediately captured Richard's attention. It was like a colorful bird perched in a field of ashes. Her dress, simple but clean, the poorly made braids that betrayed the effort of hurried hands, and mainly the look, curious, free of judgments, absorbing everything with the purity that only children can maintain. No one there knew who Richard really was. No one imagined that this ordinary-looking man controlled companies that moved billions, that his signature could change the fate of entire cities, that governors answered his calls on the first ring. There, in that expensive restaurant, he was just another customer, and that comforted him. It was one of the few places where he could be just Richard, not Mr. Morrison from the board meetings. The waiter approached with the trained discretion of those who serve wealth. "Would you like anything else, sir?" Richard made a slight negative gesture with his head. "Just the check, please." The waiter nodded and walked away, returning minutes later with a small silver tray. Richard didn't even look at the amount printed on the paper. He took the platinum card from his jacket's inner pocket and handed it over with the automatic movement of someone who had performed that gesture thousands of times. It wasn't a gesture of ostentation. It was just routine. When the waiter returned with the card machine, Richard continued discreetly observing the girl at the distant table. She was drawing something on a napkin, while her mother, visibly uncomfortable in that environment, nervously checked the menu. The waiter cleared his throat, breaking Richard's contemplation. "Sir, we have a problem." Richard turned slowly, raising his eyebrows in a silent question. "Your card was declined." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. For a second, Richard remained completely still, his face an impenetrable mask. In his mind, however, gears spun rapidly. It was impossible. That card had a practically unlimited limit. It must be some system error. "Please try again." The waiter, clearly embarrassed, swiped the card through the machine a second time. The device emitted a dry, almost accusatory beep. The small screen flashed red. "Transaction denied." It was then that Richard realized the restaurant's murmur had decreased. Curious glances turned in his direction, some discreet, others not so much. It was as if everyone present had antennas tuned to the frequency of others' humiliation. "Perhaps you have another card?" the waiter suggested with a lower voice, trying to preserve what remained of the situation's dignity. Richard maintained his composure. Years of tense negotiations had trained him not to show weakness. He began looking for another card when a voice rose from the next table. "If you can't pay, you should stay home eating instant noodles." The voice belonged to a man in his early 40s, perfectly styled hair, and a watch that cost more than many people's cars. His comment was followed by contained laughter from his companions. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Richard could have responded. He could have said who he really was. With one phone call, he could buy that entire restaurant and fire everyone present. But something in his core stopped him. That wasn't how he lived his life. That wasn't how he had built his empire, responding to cheap provocations with demonstrations of power. However, for the first time in decades, Richard felt the heat of shame rising up his neck. Not for lack of money, he knew it was just a technical error, but for the public exposure of something as intimate as his ability to honor commitments. It was like being naked in front of strangers. More voices began to whisper around. Malicious comments about people who want to seem what they're not, and poor people trying to frequent rich places reached his ears like small needles. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. The sound of a chair being dragged cut through the buzz. Small, firm steps echoed on the marble floor. Richard raised his eyes and saw, walking toward him with surprising determination, the girl with the poorly made braids. She stopped in front of his table, ignoring her mother's whispered calls. In her small hand, slightly dirty with colored pencil, she held something shiny. Her large, expressive eyes faced Richard without fear, without judgment, just with childish curiosity mixed with something he couldn't define. Could it be compassion? "Mister," she said with a clear and melodious voice, "you can use my coin." And she extended her hand, revealing a simple $1 coin, worn by time and constant handling. "It's not much," she continued, with the brutal simplicity that only children possess. "But I was saving it to buy candy. Today I think you need it more than I do." The entire restaurant fell silent. The laughter ceased as if someone had cut the sound. Even the silverware stopped clinking against the expensive porcelain. Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a lump in his throat. That child, without knowing anything about him, offered everything she had. A pure gesture, devoid of any interest or hidden motives. It was the first time in years that someone offered him something without expecting anything in return. Carefully, he took the girl's small hand between his. He felt the soft texture of childish skin, saw the short and clean nails, noticed a small blue ink stain on her thumb. In that touch, completely different worlds met. "Princess," he said, with a voice softer than he intended, "you just gave me something that no money can buy. Thank you." The girl's mother arrived hurriedly, her face flushed with shame. "Emma, come back here now." She pulled her daughter by the arm, turning to Richard with a mortified expression. "I'm sorry, sir. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's just a child." Richard smiled, feeling an emotion that hadn't visited his chest in a long time. "Don't apologize. Your daughter just reminded me that there's still goodness in the world." He gently closed the girl's fingers over the coin. "Keep this. Use it to buy your candy. You deserve it." Emma smiled, revealing a missing front tooth, a little window that perfectly matched her innocence. Richard felt something breaking inside him, an invisible wall he had erected over the years to protect himself from the world, and, without realizing it, also to isolate himself from it. The restaurant manager approached, whispering that they could resolve the situation discreetly. Richard thanked him, but decided he no longer wanted to be there. He took his wallet, withdrew some high-value bills, which he always carried for emergencies, and left them on the table, generously covering the bill. While walking to the exit, he felt the gazes upon him, but they were no longer the same. There was a mix of embarrassment and reflection on previously disdainful faces. The small lesson in humanity given by a child had silenced even the most arrogant. Outside, the night was clear and cold. Richard breathed deeply, filling his lungs with pure air that seemed to also cleanse his soul. It wasn't the card's refusal that bothered him. That would be resolved with a phone call. It was the realization of how much he had distanced himself from human essence during his journey to the top. In his triplex penthouse overlooking the city park, Richard couldn't sleep. The luxury surrounding him, paintings by renowned artists, exclusive designer furniture, Egyptian cotton sheets, everything suddenly seemed empty of meaning. In his mind, the image of that girl, Emma, and her gesture of absurd generosity repeated like a mantra. He got up and walked to the balcony. The city sparkled below, dotted with lights that looked like fallen stars. Somewhere in that vast, luminous carpet was a child who probably dreamed of candy she couldn't buy. but who, even so, had offered everything she had to a stranger in difficulty. Richard felt a solitary tear slide down his face. When was the last time he cried? He couldn't remember. Maybe at his wife's funeral, 15 years ago. Since then, he had transformed into a money-making machine, of expanding empires, of conquering markets. In the process, he had forgotten how to live. That night marked the beginning of an obsession. Richard needed to know more about that girl and her mother. Not out of empty curiosity, but because he felt a debt impossible to be paid with money, a debt of humanity. The next day, using his discreet contacts, he discovered that the girl's mother was named Sarah Williams. She was a janitor in one of the commercial buildings that, ironically, belonged to one of his companies. Widowed for just over a year, she struggled to raise Emma alone. They lived in a small rented apartment on the city's outskirts, frequently late on payments. The situation was so tight that they often depended on neighbors' solidarity to complete the month's meals. Each new piece of information was like a needle in Richard's heart. How could someone with so little be so generous? And how had he, with so much, become so empty? The final revelation came when he discovered that Sarah had taken Emma to the Golden Chateau as a special celebration. It was the girl's birthday, 7 years old, and she had never eaten at a real restaurant. Sarah had saved for months to make this small dream of her daughter come true, spending there what she would normally use for almost 2 weeks of groceries. That morning, Richard woke up with a crystal-clear resolution. He had coffee quickly, dismissed the driver, and took his least conspicuous car himself, a black sedan without ostentation. He drove to the building where Sarah worked, parked and entered like any common visitor. He found her on the 12th floor, cleaning an empty office. Her hands, red and roughened by chemicals, moved with the efficiency of someone who has no time to waste. The light blue uniform stood out against her brown skin. There was in her a silent dignity, a strength that Richard immediately recognized. When she saw him standing at the door, her eyes widened in recognition. "You..." Richard smiled, trying to ease the situation's discomfort. "Good morning, Sarah." She stopped what she was doing, holding the cleaning cloth like a shield. "How do you know my name? And what are you doing here?" "I came to thank you," Richard replied, keeping distance so as not to intimidate her. "Last night, your daughter saved me." Sarah relaxed a little, a shy smile appearing on her tired lips. "Emma has those moments. Sorry if she bothered you. She was just being a child." "It was much more than that," Richard contested, feeling again that strange emotion in his chest. "She showed me something I had forgotten." Sarah observed him with curiosity. "Your card really didn't work. I thought it was just confusion." Richard shook his head. "It was a bank error. I already resolved it, but that's not what I came to talk about." He breathed deeply. "Your daughter turned 7 yesterday, didn't she?" Sarah's expression immediately changed to suspicion. "How do you know that? Are you investigating me?" Richard realized his mistake. He had crossed a line. "I'm sorry. That sounded strange. It's just that I wanted to do something to thank her gesture and ended up discovering some things." Sarah crossed her arms, defensive. "We don't need charity, sir. I have little, but I have dignity." Those words hit Richard like a slap. He recognized in them the same pride he cultivated, the same resistance to accepting help. "It's not charity, Sarah. It's gratitude." He paused, searching for the right words. "Yesterday, your daughter offered me a coin. It seems like little, but it was everything she had. That affected me in a way I can't explain." Sarah uncrossed her arms, her expression softening. "She's like that. She has a huge heart, even when we're lacking." "I want to give back," Richard said finally. "Not out of pity, but because I need to do this. For me." She studied him for long seconds, as if evaluating his sincerity. "You don't even know me. Why would you care?" "Because your daughter saw me when I was invisible," Richard replied, with an honesty that surprised himself. "In a restaurant full of rich people, the only one who really saw me was a 7-year-old child." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with meanings. Sarah pondered, torn between pride and real need. Richard waited, patient like someone who learned that some negotiations cannot be rushed. "How long have you worked in this building?" he asked, slightly changing the approach. 3 years, she replied, returning to clean the table to disguise her discomfort. "I started right after Emma started school." "And what did you do before?" The question seemed to awaken something in Sarah. Her eyes briefly shone. I was a hairdresser. I had talent, you know. But after Michael, my husband, got sick, I needed a job with fixed hours and employment benefits to have health insurance. And did you like it? Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated her tired face. I loved it. Transforming people, seeing them smile when looking in the mirror. It was magical. Richard nodded, understanding. Why didn't you go back after he died? She completed, without evasion. I tried. But without capital to set up a salon and with a small daughter to raise alone, the numbers didn't add up. Here at least I have stability, even if the salary barely covers the basics. At that moment, an idea began to form in Richard's mind. It wouldn't be just any help. It would be something that would return to Sarah not only resources, but purpose. What if you had that chance again? He asked. Sarah looked at him confused. What chance? To go back to doing what you love. She laughed, but it was a laugh without joy. That's an impossible dream, sir. Richard, he completed. My name is Richard Morrison. Recognition crossed Sarah's face like lightning. Morrison, from Morrison Incorporations? Richard nodded without vanity. Among other companies, yes. Sarah let the cleaning cloth fall. My God, you own this building, and you were at the restaurant yesterday and the card, I don't understand. Sometimes I like to be just another person, Richard explained. To feel normal, you know, without people agreeing with everything I say just because I have money. Sarah stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. That's why Emma approached you. She always says she can see when people are sad, even when they're smiling. Richard felt that lump in his throat again. Your daughter is special, Sarah, and so are you. He breathed deeply. Let me help, not as charity, but as investment in people who deserve a chance. In the days that followed, Richard began to help discreetly, without revealing his identity to anyone besides Sarah. Basic food baskets were delivered without sender. The overdue rent was mysteriously settled. Small educational gifts appeared for Emma. Sarah, initially resistant, ended up accepting that unusual help, mainly because she saw that Richard didn't act out of pity, but from a genuine need to give back. Gradually, an unlikely friendship began to bloom. The lonely billionaire and the struggling janitor discovered that despite their different worlds, they shared surprisingly similar values. Richard began visiting the small apartment where they lived. It was a simple place, but clean and organized. What it lacked in space and furniture, it had an abundance of human warmth. On the walls, Emma's colorful drawings. On the small shelf, children's books worn from constant use. In the air, the smell of freshly brewed coffee that Sarah always offered, even when Richard said she didn't need to bother. In one of these visits, while Emma proudly showed her collection of colorful pebbles found on the way to school, Richard noticed an old photo album on the table. May I? He asked, indicating the album. Sarah nodded, a bit embarrassed. They're just old memories, nothing special. Richard opened the album carefully. The first pages showed Sarah much younger, smiling, in front of a small beauty salon. An improvised banner said, Grand Opening, Sarah's Beauty Space. Was it yours? Richard asked, genuinely interested. Sarah sat beside him, touching the photo with nostalgia. My first and only salon. It lasted only 8 months. The location was bad. I had no experience with management. But they were the best 8 months of my professional life. Turning more pages, Richard saw photos of smiling clients, of Sarah in improvement courses, of small celebrations. There was life in those images. There was passion. You never stopped dreaming about this, did you? Sarah sighed. Dreaming is free, but with time we learn to be realistic. At that moment, Emma approached, leaning over the album. Mommy was a princess back then, said the girl, with genuine admiration. She made everyone beautiful and happy. Richard looked from Emma to Sarah, clearly seeing the pride in the girl's eyes. He realized that the true wealth of that family wasn't in material goods, but in how they saw each other, how they supported each other, how they maintained dignity, even in the most difficult circumstances. The next week, Richard invited Sarah and Emma for an outing. Without revealing the destination, he asked them to accompany him to an old commercial space in the city center. It was an abandoned space that had once been a beauty salon, closed for years. What are we doing here? Sarah asked, confused, when they stopped in front of the place with closed doors and dusty windows. Richard handed her an envelope. "Open it." With trembling hands, Sarah removed from the envelope a set of documents and a key. Her eyes quickly scanned the papers, widening in comprehension. This is a deed in my name?" Richard nodded, watching the emotion grow on her face. "I want it to be yours," he said simply, "to start over." Sarah shook her head, incredulous. "I can't accept this. It's too much, "You can," Richard interrupted. "You've always taken care of everyone except yourself. Now it's time to take care of your dreams too." Emma, who had been quiet until then, looked from one to the other, trying to understand what was happening. When she understood, she began jumping with joy. Is Mommy going to be a princess again? Is she going to make people happy again? Richard knelt down, getting to the girl's eye level. "Yes, Emma. Your mother is going to make many people happy. And do you know why? Because you taught me that sometimes we need to give without expecting anything in return." Sarah cried. They were tears of an emotion she couldn't name, a mixture of gratitude, hope, and fear of the unknown. Richard observed her in silence, respecting that moment. Something inside him was also changing, as if a rusty gear was starting to turn again after years of inactivity. That night, in his luxurious apartment, Richard looked at the city, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He had found a true connection, not based on his money or position, but on something much more valuable, shared humanity. Time passed. The salon, named Emma's Space, became reality. Richard financed not only the renovation and equipment, but also invested in updating courses for Sarah and management consulting, so she wouldn't repeat past mistakes. The space was inaugurated on a sunny Saturday morning. Sarah, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, cut the red ribbon under applause from friends, neighbors, and potential clients. Emma, beside her, wore a dress that matched her mother's and held a small bouquet of flowers. Richard remained discreetly in the background. He didn't want to overshadow that moment with his presence. For him, the true reward was seeing the brightness in Sarah's eyes, the renewed confidence in her movements, the genuine smile that now appeared more frequently. But not everyone was happy with that story. Among the neighbors from the old building where Sarah lived, there was Thomas Miller, a bitter and envious man. He followed with growing resentment Sarah and Emma's change of life. For him, it was inadmissible that a simple janitor could rise in life while he, who considered himself superior, remained stagnant. Thomas began spreading malicious rumors through the neighborhood. He insinuated that Richard was a con man who deceived Sarah, that the salon was a front for illegal activities, that the relationship between them was suspicious. The gossip spread quickly and soon reached Sarah's ears. "They're talking about us in the neighborhood," she told Richard one afternoon at the salon, after work hours. "They say horrible things." Richard, who had faced malicious talk throughout his business life, just smiled. "Let them talk. Time shows who's right." Sarah looked at him with admiration. "How can you not care? Doesn't that hurt you?" Richard reflected for a moment, observing the empty salon, but impeccably arranged, a reflection of Sarah's dedication. "I learned long ago that unhappy people try to diminish others' happiness. It's not about us, it's about them." Emma, who was playing in a corner with her dolls, approached. "Uncle Richard, why do people get angry when other people are happy?" The question, in its childish simplicity, hit the core of the issue. Richard knelt to get to the girl's height. "Because some people forget that happiness isn't a cake that runs out when we share it. Happiness is like the stars. There's enough for everyone to see and admire." Emma smiled, satisfied with the answer, and returned to her dolls. Richard and Sarah exchanged knowing looks, like adults who learn valuable lessons through children's innocent questions. As time passed, Emma's Space gained reputation. Sarah wasn't just technically excellent. She had a natural gift for making clients feel special. The salon began to prosper, first serving the local community, then attracting clients from more distant neighborhoods. Richard watched this evolution with the pride of someone who planted a seed and sees the tree grow. He still helped behind the scenes, with advice and occasionally with resources, but increasingly, Sarah walked on her own legs. For Emma, the transformation was equally profound. The girl now attended a better school, had access to books, music lessons, and everything a child deserves to develop fully. But most importantly, she kept intact that natural goodness, that ability to see beyond appearances. One afternoon, While Richard helped her with homework, something that had become routine, Emma asked an unexpected question. "Uncle Richard, were you sad before meeting us?" The question caught him off guard. Richard put down his pencil, thoughtful. "Why do you think that, Emma?" The girl shrugged, with that perspicacity that sometimes frightened. "Because your eyes smile more now. Before at the restaurant, you only smiled with your mouth." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. How could a child see so clearly what adults, with all their supposed wisdom, ignored? "I think I was, yes," he finally admitted. "Did you know it's possible to be rich and sad at the same time?" Emma nodded, serious. "Like the prince in that movie we watched. He had a castle, but he was alone." "Exactly," Richard agreed. "And do you know what made me less sad?" "What?" "Finding people who care about me for who I am, not for what I have." Emma smiled, proud to have understood something so complex. "Like me and Mommy?" "Yes, like you and your mother." The girl returned to her homework satisfied, while Richard reflected on how his life had changed in recent months. The business empire continued there, the responsibilities too. But now there was something more, a genuine human connection that filled a void he didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, the rumors spread by Thomas Miller gained larger proportions. Not satisfied with defaming Sarah in the neighborhood, he began sending anonymous letters to salon clients, insinuating irregularities. He also sought suppliers, spreading lies about the business's financial health. Sarah tried not to show it, but Richard noticed her growing concern. Some clients began canceling without explanation. Suppliers started demanding advance payment. The light and positive atmosphere of the salon began to be contaminated by a cloud of apprehension. "I need to do something," Richard said, after discovering the origin of the defamations through a discreet investigation. Sarah shook her head, resigned. "That man has always looked at me with disdain. Since I moved to the building with Michael, still pregnant with Emma. As if we were inferior, you know? But I never imagined he'd go this far." "Why would he do this?" Richard asked, genuinely intrigued by human pettiness. Sarah sighed, automatically arranging products on shelves, a habit she had when nervous. "Thomas always wanted to be someone important. He lives bragging, saying he knows influential people, that he has investments. But everyone knows it's just a facade. I think he can't stand seeing someone he considered inferior truly prospering." Richard knew that type well. In his business years, he had encountered dozens of Thomases, people who built sandcastles and despaired when the tide rose, revealing the fragility of their lies. "I'm going to talk to him," Richard decided. Sarah widened her eyes, alarmed. "No, that will only make things worse. He'll twist everything, say I'm sending my rich protector to intimidate him." Richard smiled, reassuring. "Trust me, sometimes truth is the only weapon we need." The next morning, Richard parked his car, purposely the most luxurious and imposing in his collection, in front of the building where Thomas lived. He dressed formally, in a suit that cost more than a year's rent in that place. He wanted to make a silent statement before any words were exchanged. When Thomas left for work, he encountered Richard leaning against his silver Bentley. The man stopped abruptly, recognizing him from the times he had seen him with Sarah and Emma. "Mr. Miller," Richard said, with the controlled and professional voice he used in difficult negotiations. "Can we talk?" Thomas hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm late for work." "This won't take long," Richard assured, opening the passenger door. "And I guarantee your boss won't mind the delay when he knows who you were with." The implicit mention of his influence worked. Thomas got in the car reluctantly. For a few minutes, Richard drove in silence, letting the vehicle's luxury and the moment's tension do their psychological work. "I know what you've been doing," he said finally, without taking his eyes off the road. "The anonymous letters, the rumors, the calls to suppliers." Thomas paled, but tried to maintain composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Mr. Miller, I spent my life building and buying companies. Do you know what I learned? That it's much easier to destroy than to build. Anyone can spread rumors, plant doubts, undermine trust. No talent is needed for that." He stopped the car in front of one of the skyscrapers that bore the name Morrison in discreet but impossible to ignore letters. "Do you know who I am?" Thomas looked at the building, then at Richard, understanding slowly forming in his eyes. "You're Richard Morrison? The Richard Morrison?" Richard nodded. The same. And do you know why I'm telling you this? Because I want you to understand who you're dealing with. Not for me, but for Sarah and Emma. He turned completely to face Thomas, who now seemed to shrink in the leather seat. Those two people you've been trying to harm taught me more about dignity and kindness in a few months than I learned in decades of business. They don't deserve your pettiness. Thomas swallowed hard. I didn't... Don't lie, Richard cut off, firmly but without raising his voice. Don't insult my intelligence. I have enough evidence to sue you for defamation, slander, and a list of other crimes my lawyers would love to enumerate in a public trial. The man paled even more. What are you going to do to me? Richard studied him for a moment. He saw now what Sarah had described. A mediocre man whose greatest ambition was to seem important in others' eyes. Deep down, someone profoundly unhappy. Nothing, he replied finally. Nothing, Thomas repeated, confused. Absolutely nothing, Richard confirmed. As long as you immediately stop this campaign against Sarah and the salon, that you retract with the suppliers and clients you contacted, and that you never cross their path again. Thomas blinked, incredulous. That's it, you won't sue me? Ruin me? Richard gave a slight smile. Do you know why not? Because I learned from a 7-year-old child that revenge isn't the answer. That sometimes true strength is in extending your hand, not in closing your fist. He restarted the car. But understand one thing, Mr. Miller. This is your only chance. If I hear about one more rumor, one insinuation, anything that harms Sarah or Emma, I won't be so understanding. On the way back, Thomas remained silent, digesting everything he had heard. When Richard left him in front of his work, purposely in front of several colleagues who watched the Bentley with open mouths, Thomas hesitated before getting out. Why do you care so much about them? They're just ordinary people. Richard looked at him with a serenity that disconcerted the other man. That's exactly why, Mr. Miller. Because they're authentic in a world of falsehoods, and that's more valuable than all the money I possess. From that day on, the rumors ceased completely. More than that, Thomas made a point of publicly retracting, inventing excuses about misunderstandings and incorrect information. In a few weeks, the clients returned, and Emma's space prospered again. Sarah never asked Richard what he had done, and he never told. There was between them a silent understanding. Some battles didn't need to be shared, just won. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening. Richard, the man who had built an empire by keeping himself emotionally distant from everything and everyone, began to get increasingly involved in that small family's life. Sunday dinners became tradition. Special dates were celebrated together. Richard was present at Emma's school presentations, at parent-teacher meetings, in small daily achievements. Sarah observed this transformation with a mix of gratitude and concern. One night, after Emma had fallen asleep, she finally expressed what troubled her. Richard, I need to ask something that has bothered me for a while. They were sitting on the small balcony of the new apartment where Sarah and Emma had moved. Comfortable, safe, but without ostentation. Richard held a cup of tea, appreciating the simplicity of that moment. You can ask me anything, Sarah. She breathed deeply, choosing her words carefully. Why us? In the whole world, there must be thousands of people in worse situations with sadder stories. Why did you decide to change your life because of a child's gesture? The question hung in the air like morning mist. Richard contemplated the city below, the lights that blinked like reflections of the life pulsing in each illuminated window. You know, Sarah, I spent decades accumulating wealth. I built companies, bought properties, multiplied investments. In the process, I forgot how to live. He paused, searching for the right words. When my wife died, I lost my last real connection to the world. In the following years, I became just a function, the CEO, the investor, the philanthropist at charity events. But never again just Richard. Sarah watched him in silence, respecting that confession. That night at the restaurant, when my card was refused, it wasn't the public humiliation that shook me. It was realizing that if I disappeared at that instant, no one would miss me. Only my money, my signature on contracts, my name on documents. He smiled, looking at the half-open door of the room where Emma slept. And then came that child, with a $1 coin and a heart bigger than the world. She didn't see my suit, my position, my refused card. She saw a human being who seemed to need help, and she offered everything she had without hesitation. Richard felt emotion growing in his chest. At that moment, Sarah, I realized I had forgotten what it was like to be human, and your daughter reminded me. Sarah had tears in her eyes. You changed our lives. No, Richard gently contested. You changed mine. I just gave back with what I have, resources. You gave me something much more valuable, meaning. The next morning, while having coffee together, another tradition they had established, Richard's phone rang. It was his secretary informing about an urgent meeting with foreign investors. He needed to travel immediately. I'll have to go to London for a few days, he explained after hanging up. Unavoidable business. Emma, who was nibbling toast with jam, made a pout. But you'll miss my ballet presentation. Richard felt a pang of guilt. Throughout his business life, he had missed countless personal commitments in the name of business. It was something natural in his world. But now, facing those disappointed childish eyes, everything seemed different. You know what? He said, making a sudden decision. London can wait. Your presentation can't. Sarah intervened, worried. Richard, you can't postpone a meeting of that magnitude because of a school presentation. He smiled, serene. Yes, I can. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Some things are more important than business, Sarah. It took me almost 60 years to learn this, but I finally learned. The ballet presentation was, as one might expect from 7-year-olds, adorable in its imperfection. Emma, in her pink tutu and hair carefully arranged in a bun made by Sarah, wasn't the most graceful dancer, but compensated in enthusiasm what she lacked in technique. Richard watched everything from the front row, beside Sarah. He applauded as if he were at the most prestigious ballet presentation in the world, and in a way for him he was. Because there, on that improvised stage, danced not just a child, but the symbol of everything he had rediscovered about life and about himself. When the presentation ended and Emma ran to hug them, Richard felt that familiar emotion in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, affection, and something more, something he didn't dare name, but recognized as essential. The months transformed into a year, then into 2. Emma's space flourished, expanding to a larger location, hiring employees, becoming a neighborhood reference. Sarah, previously insecure, now taught courses and workshops for other professionals. Her transformation went far beyond the financial aspect. There was in her a quiet confidence, a serenity of someone who found their place in the world. Emma grew, surrounded by love and opportunities, but maintaining that unique essence that had made her extend her hand to a stranger in difficulty. Richard watched her with a mix of pride and fascination, seeing her develop talents for music, for drawing, for making friends easily. As for Richard, he also underwent profound transformations. He continued leading his businesses, but with a new perspective. He implemented significant changes in his companies, better conditions for employees, genuine social projects, not just for marketing. The man who once saw only numbers on spreadsheets now saw people, lives, stories. On an autumn afternoon, Richard invited Sarah and Emma to lunch at his house, the luxurious penthouse that rarely received visitors. He wanted to share with them a space that for so long had been just a symbol of his material success, not a true home. "Wow!" exclaimed Emma upon entering, her eyes scanning the ample spaces, the artworks, the panoramic city view. "It's like Sleeping Beauty's castle." Sarah also seemed impressed, but in a different way. She observed everything with a thoughtful, almost melancholic look. "Everything okay?" Richard asked, noticing her expression. She nodded, forcing a smile. "It's just that it's strange seeing where you really live. It makes it seem like we're from completely different worlds." The observation caught Richard off guard. He had never thought about it that way. For him, the apartment was just a place, not a status declaration. "It's just a space, Sarah. It doesn't define who I am." She agreed with her head, but Richard perceived that something had changed. A subtle barrier had risen between them. The reality of their social differences, momentarily forgotten, now imposed itself again. During lunch, Emma dominated the conversation with school stories, questions about the paintings on the walls, comments about the food prepared by Richard's personal chef. Sarah, on the other hand, was unusually quiet, responding only when directly questioned. After Emma asked to explore the enormous library, her new favorite place, Richard finally confronted the elephant in the room. "What's happening, Sarah? You're different today." She sighed, absent-mindedly playing with the crystal glass in front of her. "I received a proposal. An investor wants to franchise Emma's space. Open salons in other neighborhoods, maybe in other cities." Richard smiled, genuinely happy for her. "That's wonderful. It's recognition of your work, your talent." But Sarah didn't seem to share his enthusiasm. "It's a great opportunity, yes, but—" She hesitated, insecure. "But," Richard encouraged, "but I'm afraid that the more I grow in this business world, the more dependent I become on you, on your guidance, on your knowledge." Richard frowned, confused. "I don't understand. You're perfectly capable of making your own decisions, Sarah." She finally looked at him, her eyes reflecting a determination he knew well. "Yes, I am, and that's exactly why I need to do this alone. I need to know I can build something on my own merit, not because I have a billionaire supporting me." The words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Not because of their harshness, Sarah was always gentle, but because of the truth they contained. "Do you think I'm controlling your life?" he asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Sarah shook her head, her eyes softening. "No, Richard. I think you gave us an invaluable gift, a chance. And now, I need to honor that gift by being true to myself." She breathed deeply before continuing. "I need space to grow as a businesswoman, as an independent woman, to show Emma that her mother can conquer the world on her own." Richard felt something break inside him. He had become so accustomed to their presence in his life that the idea of distance seemed unbearable. But at the same time, he perfectly understood what Sarah was saying. It was exactly why he admired her. For her integrity, her inner strength. "I understand," he said finally with a slightly choked voice, "and I respect your decision." Sarah extended her hand across the table, lightly touching his. "I'm not saying goodbye, Richard. I'm just asking for space to fly with my own wings. You taught me I can. Now I need to prove it to myself." In the following weeks, Richard kept his word. He gradually distanced himself, limiting his visits, refraining from offering unsolicited advice. It was one of the most difficult periods of his life, more painful, in many aspects, than when he lost his wife. Because this time, it wasn't death that created the separation, but a conscious choice. Emma missed him and didn't hesitate to show it. She called frequently, sent drawings by mail, asked when he would visit them again. Each contact was a mix of joy and pain for Richard. Sarah moved forward with her plans. She negotiated with the investor, established her terms, began expanding Emma's space. From afar, Richard watched with pride her evolution, even though each achievement meant less need for his presence. It was in one of those calls from Emma that something unexpected happened. "Uncle Richard," said the girl, now 9 years old, "Mommy is crying in her room. She doesn't want me to see, but I know." Richard felt his heart tighten. "What happened, dear? Is she sick?" "I don't know." Emma's voice was small, worried. "She got a phone call and then went to her room. I think it's about the new salon." Richard hesitated. He had promised to give Sarah space, to respect her independence. But if she really needed help, "Do you want me to come over?" he asked, cautious. "Please," Emma replied, relief evident in her voice. "Mommy has been sad for days, but today it's worse." Richard wasted no time. In less than an hour, he was at Sarah's apartment door. Emma opened immediately, hugging him tightly. "She's still in her room," the girl whispered. Richard hesitated again. Would he be crossing boundaries, invading the privacy Sarah valued so much? "Maybe it's better to wait until she comes out," he suggested. But at that moment, the bedroom door opened. Sarah appeared, her eyes red and swollen, surprise evident on her face seeing Richard. "What are you—" "I called him, Mommy," Emma quickly intervened. "You're sad and won't tell me why." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. "Emma, dear, can you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Uncle Richard." The girl nodded, casting one last worried look before retreating. When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence settled between the adults. "Sorry for coming without warning," Richard said finally. "Emma was worried." Sarah ran her hand through her disheveled hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "No, I'm the one who should apologize. I didn't want to involve you in this, but— Sarah, Richard interrupted gently. What happened? She breathed deeply, like someone preparing to rip off a bandage. The investor. He's withdrawing from the business. He said complications arose, that the market is unstable. She paused, her voice trembling slightly. But the truth is, he found a better opportunity. Another salon, with a younger, more attractive owner. Richard felt a wave of anger rise through his body but maintained his composure. He said that? Not directly, but he made it implicit between the lines. And the worst part— she hesitated, her eyes welling up again. The worst part is I already invested everything I had in the expansion. I rented the space, bought equipment, hired people. Richard immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Without the investor's capital, Sarah was on the brink of bankruptcy. All the work, all the rebuilt dream, threatened again. Why didn't you come to me? He asked, with no accusation in his voice, just genuine concern. Sarah wiped away a stubborn tear. Pride. Stubbornness. I wanted to prove I could solve my own problems. She gave a tremulous smile. I'm not doing very well at it, am I? Richard approached, taking her hands between his. You're doing perfectly well. This isn't your failure, Sarah. It's an injustice, pure and simple. She looked at him with a vulnerability she rarely showed. What am I going to do, Richard? If I lose everything now, it's not just my dream that ends. It's jobs, commitments I made. Richard breathed deeply, thinking quickly. Let me help. Not as a savior, but as a partner. An investor who genuinely believes in you and your potential. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her pride fighting against real need. You would do that? Even after I asked for distance? Richard smiled, gently squeezing her hands. Especially because of that. Because I respect your independence enough to offer help without conditions, without control. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, Richard and Sarah worked together on a new business plan. There was no longer the benevolent billionaire and grateful protege. They were two adults, equally committed, each contributing their strengths. Sarah with her vision, her experience in the field, her connection with clients. Richard with his market knowledge, his experience in business expansion, his capital. When they finished, it was already dawn. Emma had fallen asleep hours ago, reassured seeing the adults working together again. Thank you, Sarah said as Richard prepared to leave. Not just for the financial help, but for respecting my space, my autonomy. Richard smiled, tired but satisfied. You know what I realized, Sarah? That giving space to those we love doesn't mean abandoning them. It means being present in a way that allows growth. The words came out before he could censor them. Those we love. Sarah blinked, surprised, and Richard felt the weight of what he had just said. He began, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Sarah took a step forward, interrupting him with a gentle touch on his arm. I know, she said simply. Me too. It wasn't a grandiose declaration. There were no fireworks or background music. It was just a quiet, honest recognition of something that had grown between them over those years. Something that transcended gratitude, friendship, or any other easily nameable feeling. The next morning, Richard arrived early at the office. There was much work to be done to implement the plan he and Sarah had developed. But there was also a lightness in his steps, an energy that his employees immediately noticed. Mr. Morrison, said his secretary, surprised. You're humming? Richard stopped, realizing he really was. He smiled without embarrassment. I am, Paula. Apparently I am. In the months that followed, Emma's space not only survived, but prospered. The expansion happened not with an external investor, but with a genuine partnership between Sarah and Richard. She maintained absolute creative and operational control. He contributed capital and mentorship, always respecting her final decisions. The real transformation, however, happened in their personal relationship. What had been a friendship born from gratitude and kindness transformed into something deeper, more mature. It wasn't teenage passion, with dramatic declarations and grandiose gestures. It was an affection built on foundations of mutual respect, genuine admiration, and shared values. Emma observed this evolution with the peculiar wisdom of children. Are you going to get married? She asked one night. While the three of them dined together, another resumed tradition. Sarah choked on her wine, while Richard became suddenly very interested in his salad. Emma, Sarah scolded, blushing. "What kind of question is that?" The girl shrugged, with the naturalness of innocence. "You look at each other like Julia's parents look at each other, and they're married." Richard and Sarah exchanged embarrassed looks, but there was also a knowing smile at the corners of their lips. "Things are a bit more complicated between adults, dear," Sarah explained. Emma frowned, dissatisfied with the answer. "Why? If you like each other and are happy together, what's complicated about it?" Richard couldn't help but laugh. Again, that child dismantled adult complexities with the implacable logic of simplicity. "You know, Emma," he said, "sometimes adults complicate things that should be simple. It's a talent we develop with age." The girl nodded, as if that confirmed some theory she already had about adults and their strangeness. That night, when Emma was already asleep, Richard and Sarah sat on the balcony, sharing the comfortable silence that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. "She's right, you know," Richard said finally. "We complicate things too much." Sarah smiled, looking at the stars above. "That's what we do. We think too much, analyze too much, fear too much." Richard took her hand between his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "What if we simplified? What if we just followed what we feel?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights below. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard Morrison?" He smiled, feeling simultaneously like an insecure teenager and like the 60-year-old man he was, full of experience, scars, and hard-won certainties. "I'm suggesting that Emma has remarkable perception, and that maybe we should listen to her more often." Sarah laughed, a light and musical sound that Richard had learned to love. "Are you asking for my hand using our daughter as Cupid?" Our daughter. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Emma had in fact become both their daughter, not by blood or documents, but by that indefinable and powerful bond of love. "Maybe I am," Richard admitted. "Am I doing this terribly wrong?" Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and emotion. "Actually, you're doing it in a perfectly imperfect way, like everything in our story." Richard felt his heart accelerate. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations with less nervousness than he felt at that moment. "So was that a yes?" Sarah tilted her head, thoughtful. "It's a let's talk about this like the responsible adults we are. We have a child to consider, established lives, significant differences." Richard sighed, recognizing the reason in her words. Always the voice of sense. She smiled, touching his face gently. "Someone has to be, when an impetuous billionaire decides to follow a 9-year-old's advice." Both laughed, the moment's tension dissipating in the night air. They didn't need definitive answers that night. What they had, that connection, that mutual understanding, was too precious to be rushed. In the following weeks, a comfortable routine was established. Richard spent more time at Sarah and Emma's apartment than in his own luxurious penthouse. Family dinners, homework help, weekends in the park, small rituals that built day after day the foundations of something lasting. The Emma's Space Salon network grew organically, without haste, preserving the quality and values Sarah so prized. She flourished as a businesswoman, gaining confidence with each new challenge overcome. Richard watched her with admiration, proud not of what he had done for her, but of what she conquered on her own merit. On a Sunday afternoon, while preparing lunch together, Richard had discovered an unexpected talent for cooking, to everyone's surprise. Emma made another of her disconcerting questions. "Uncle Richard, do you believe in angels?" He stopped cutting vegetables, intrigued. "Angels? Why do you ask that?" Emma, sitting at the table drawing, shrugged with that childish casualness. "The religion teacher said angels are messengers, that they appear when we need them most, even if we don't realize they're angels." Richard exchanged a curious look with Sarah, who interrupted dessert preparation to listen better. "And what do you think about that?" he asked. Emma raised her eyes from the drawing, with that serious expression she assumed when reflecting on something important. "I think I was your angel that day at the restaurant, and you were our angel afterward." The comment, in its profound simplicity, hit Richard like a revelation. In a way, that child had understood the essence of the entire journey they had shared. "You know, Emma," he said, kneeling to get to her height, "I think you're right. Sometimes people enter our lives exactly when we need them, even if we don't know it at the time." Sarah approached, moved. "And sometimes," she added, Those people stay and become family. Emma smiled, satisfied with the answer, and returned to her drawing. Richard and Sarah remained side by side watching her, sharing a moment of silent understanding about the miracle that had happened in their lives. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Richard made a decision that had been maturing for weeks. He no longer wanted to divide his life between two worlds, the luxurious apartment where he slept and the welcoming home where his heart truly resided. "Sarah," he said, while they shared a glass of wine on the balcony, another small ritual they had created. "I've been thinking." She raised her eyebrows with a playful smile. "Always dangerous." Richard laughed, but soon resumed seriousness. "I want to sell my penthouse." Sarah blinked, surprised. "Sell? Why, you love that place." He shook his head, thoughtful. "Actually, I don't. I love the view, maybe. But the apartment itself? It's just an empty space full of expensive things. It was never a home." Sarah studied him attentively, sensing there was more behind those words. "And what would you do afterward? Buy another place?" Richard breathed deeply. It was now or never. "I was thinking of something more permanent. Something we could choose together, the three of us." The meaning of those words hung between them like a promise. Sarah didn't respond immediately, her eyes revealing the storm of emotions crossing her. "Richard, are you proposing what I think you are?" He took her hands between his, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm proposing that we make official what we already are in practice, a family. Not for papers or conventions, but because we choose each other every day." Sarah felt tears forming, but they weren't of sadness or fear. They were of deep joy, a certainty that had crystallized with time. "Are you sure? Your life was so different before us." Richard smiled, gently squeezing her hands. "Exactly. It was a life of success, but empty of meaning. You gave me something no bank account could buy: belonging." That night, there was no formal yes, no rings or grandiose promises. There were just two people recognizing, with the simplicity they had learned to value, that their paths were now one. When they told Emma the news the next morning, her reaction was one of pure childish logic. "Finally!" she exclaimed, hands on her hips in a comic pose of exasperation. "I thought I'd have to draw a map for you to find the way." Richard and Sarah laughed until tears came, marveled at the wisdom disguised as impatience of that child who had, unknowingly, changed everyone's destiny with a simple $1 coin. In the following weeks, they made plans. They didn't want an extravagant ceremony, just something intimate that reflected the journey they had shared. They decided to look for a house, neither as grand as Richard's penthouse, nor as modest as Sarah's apartment. A middle ground, a new beginning. It was during this search that Richard received an unexpected call. The Golden Chateau, the restaurant where everything had begun 3 years earlier, was for sale. The owner, facing financial difficulties, sought a discreet buyer, someone who would preserve the establishment's reputation. Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. Coincidence? Destiny? It didn't matter the name. The opportunity seemed too perfect to be ignored. Without telling Sarah or Emma, he visited the restaurant. The environment still maintained that aura of affected elegance, that climate of social distinction that had once attracted him as anonymous refuge. Now, he saw everything with different eyes, perceived the superficiality, the emptiness behind carefully cultivated appearances. Even so, there was potential there. The space was magnificent, the location privileged. With the right changes, it could transform into something completely different. When he returned home, for that's how he thought of Sarah's apartment now, as home, he was decided. He shared his idea during dinner. "Do you remember the Golden Chateau?" Emma made a face. "That boring place where everyone was showing off?" Sarah and Richard laughed at the precise description. "That's the one," he confirmed. "It's for sale." Sarah raised her eyebrows, curious. "And this matters because—" Richard smiled, feeling that excitement that only comes when a really good idea takes shape. "I was thinking of buying it, transforming it completely, making it reborn as something new." Sarah watched him, intrigued. "What kind of transformation do you have in mind?" Richard leaned over the table, his eyes shining with contained enthusiasm. "A place where everyone is welcome, where the food is excellent, but the environment is welcoming. Without pretension, without arrogance. A restaurant that celebrates humanity, not status." Sarah smiled, immediately understanding the vision. A place where no one would need to offer a coin to feel accepted. Exactly, Richard confirmed, and I want it to be called $1 coin. Emma, who had been following the conversation attentively, opened a radiant smile. Like my coin, the one I gave you. Richard nodded, moved. Yes, like your coin. So we never forget where we came from and what really matters. The transformation of the old golden chateau into $1 coin took 6 months. Richard personally involved himself in every detail, something he rarely did in his other businesses. Sarah contributed ideas to make the environment more welcoming, more authentic. Even Emma participated, creating drawings that were incorporated into the decoration. The grand opening happened on a spring night. There was no red carpet or celebrity photographers, just an open door for all who wanted to enter. The prices were accessible, the service warm, the food prepared with genuine care. In a discreet corner of the main hall, a special display case exhibited, protected by glass, a simple $1 coin. Below, a small plaque explained, "This coin reminds us that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in what we're willing to share." The story behind that coin soon spread through the city. It became a kind of urban legend. The billionaire, the refused card, the generous child. Some believed it, others thought it was just a marketing strategy. Richard, Sarah, and Emma knew the truth, and that's what mattered. On opening night, while observing the restaurant full of people of all types, executives in expensive suits, families with small children, young students, elderly people, Richard felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced in his entire life of material achievements. Sarah approached, sliding her hand on his arm. "Are you happy?" she asked, observing his contemplative face. Richard smiled, covering her hand with his. More than I imagined was possible. His eyes found Emma, now 10 years old, who circulated among the tables with the ease of a natural hostess, talking with customers, making them feel special with her genuine attention. "She's incredible," Sarah commented, following his gaze. "She has a natural gift for connecting with people." Richard nodded, proud. "Like her mother." Sarah laughed softly. "Actually, I think she has a bit of both of us. My empathy, maybe, and your determination." The observation touched Richard deeply. It was true. Emma had become, in many ways, both their daughter, absorbing the best each had to offer. At that moment, as if feeling the weight of their gazes, Emma looked in their direction and smiled. That pure and true smile that only children can offer, before the world teaches them to calculate, to measure, to expect return. Richard smiled back, feeling that familiar emotion in his chest, that quiet certainty that as long as there were children capable of smiling like that, as long as there were people willing to extend their hand without expectations, as long as there were hearts open to receive and return gestures of genuine kindness, there would always be hope for humanity. And maybe, he thought, watching Emma return to her mission of making everyone feel welcome, that was the true price of dignity. Not a value to be paid, but a value to be recognized, honored, and perpetuated through simple gestures that have the power to cross generations. Like that $1 coin, which continued to shine under the restaurant's lights, reminding everyone who entered there of a truth as old as humanity itself, and yet so easily forgotten, that our true wealth will never be in what we possess, but in what we're capable of giving without fear, without calculation, without expectation, just for the simple recognition that, in the end, we're all just human beings, seeking connection, respect, and the certainty that, even in the darkest moments, someone will see us beyond appearances and extend their hand, offering not just material help, but the priceless gift of being truly seen. And this, Richard concluded while observing life pulsing around him, was the true miracle that continued to unfold day after day all over the world. Humanity's capacity to transform simple gestures into lasting legacies, to convert ephemeral moments into permanent changes, to translate instantaneous kindness into eternal impact. Like a $1 coin that, in the right hands, proved to be more valuable than all the world's fortunes. If stories like this touched you, remember, small gestures of kindness have the power to change destinies, and maybe, somewhere, someone is just waiting to be truly seen for their life to transform. If this story moved you, Share the video with someone special. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss the next stories that will warm your heart.